The Forgotten Legend. The grand chamber of the Arcadian Council gleamed with the cold brilliance of 1,000 stars reflected in its polished obsidian walls. Therovile stood before the 7 high chancellors, his four-fingered hands trembling slightly as he clutched his data terminal. For a junior historian from the outer colonies to address the council was unprecedented, but his discovery could not be ignored. At least, that's what he had believed. You expect us to allocate resources based on fairy tales. Chancellor Kresh's voice boomed through the chamber, her bioluminescent crest flashing with contempt. Humans are extinct. They have been for over 5 centuries. Thero's secondary heart fluttered with anxiety, but he persisted. With respect, Chancellor, the evidence suggests otherwise. The quantum signatures I've detected in the forbidden sectors match exactly with what we know of human propulsion technology. The patterns are too precise to be coincidental. Around the chamber, the gathered representatives of 200 galactic species murmured, some with amusement, others with irritation. Humans were nothing but historical footnotes, primitive bipeds who had reached for the stars, achieved minor spaceflight, then promptly destroyed themselves in a planetary civil war. Their legacy was as a cautionary tale, a species that embodied both promise and self-destruction. Historian Val, Chancellor Morta spoke now, his voice like gravel scraping metal. You have studied the old records too deeply. These primitive creatures barely achieved rudimentary interplanetary travel before their extinction. The idea they secretly developed advanced technology and disappeared is absurd. Thero's copper-colored skin darkened with frustration. 6 cycles of research, analyzing forbidden archives, cross-referencing anomalous energy readings, all dismissed in minutes. The Arcadian Dominion has maintained peace for 12 millennia because we prioritize facts over fantasy, Chancellor Kresh concluded. Your petition is denied. Return to your studies and focus on actual history. With a formal bow, Thero backed away from the council platform. Around him, delegates and representatives returned to more pressing matters, the brief entertainment of his human obsession already forgotten. 3 days later, Thero sat alone in his cramped research pod at the Grand Academy. The walls were lined with holographic displays of ancient Earth artifacts, theoretical reconstructions of human settlements, and energy signature analyses. His colleagues had long since stopped visiting his workspace, wary of association with the human conspiracist. He stared at the pulsing quantum signal he'd detected from the forbidden sector known as Void 459. The pattern was unmistakable, exactly matching theoretical models of human hyperdrive signatures based on their unfinished research. Yet the council refused to acknowledge it. The door to his pod slid open with a hiss. Thero quickly switched displays, but relaxed when he saw it was only Lani, his former research partner, and perhaps his only remaining friend at the academy. Still chasing ghosts? Lani asked, her thin, angular frame leaning against the doorway. Her people, the Vex, were known for their pragmatism, not their tact. The evidence is real, Lani. I've triple-checked everything. I'm sure you have, she said with surprising gentleness. But you need to know, the council's assignation orders just came through. You're being transferred to the outpost on Terax Prime. They're effectively exiling you. Cold dread washed over Thero. Terax Prime was a mining colony on the edge of charted space, as far from the academic world as one could be sent without formal banishment. When? He asked, his voice hollow. Transport leaves tomorrow. I'm sorry, Thero. I tried to intervene, but... A shrill alarm cut through their conversation, followed by a pulsing red emergency light. The academy-wide announcement system crackled to life. All personnel, this is not a drill. Unknown vessels have entered Arcadian space. Security protocols are now active. All non-essential personnel return to quarters immediately. Lenny's eyes widened. Unknown vessels. That's impossible. Every ship in the galaxy is registered with the Dominion. Thero felt a surge of vindication mixed with fear, unless they're not from any known civilization. His terminal suddenly lit up with incoming data. His monitoring program had detected a massive surge in the quantum signatures he'd been tracking. "They're coming from Void 459, he whispered. The observation deck of the Arcadian Defense Station was chaos. Thero had no authorization to be there, but in the confusion, his academy credentials had gotten him through security. He stood at the back of the room, watching the massive view screen with a mixture of terror and fascination. On the screen, a fleet of sleek, dark vessels emerged from the swirling nebula that marked the boundary of Void 459. They moved with impossible precision, their hulls absorbing rather than reflecting light, appearing as sharp-edged shadows against the stars. 17 vessels detected, announced the tactical officer, her voice strained. Configuration unknown. Technology signature unclassifiable. Chancellor Kresh stood at the command platform, her usual composed demeanor shattered. Open communications on all frequencies, and bring defensive arrays online. Chancellor, Thero called out, stepping forward despite the risk. Those are human ships. Every eye in the room turned to him. Security officers moved to intercept, but Kresh raised her hand, stopping them. Explain. Quickly. The design, the quantum signatures. They'd match reconstructed human technology patterns, but advanced by centuries. They've been out there all this time, evolving, developing. Kresh's bioluminescent crest flickered with rapid color changes, a sign of intense thought among her species. Impossible. Humans were primitive. They barely achieved spaceflight. That's what our histories say. Thero countered. But what if those histories were wrong? Or incomplete? Before Kresh could respond, the communications officer called out, Chancellor, we're receiving a transmission. It's using ancient Arcadian protocols. Nobody has used this encryption for millennia. How would unknown vessels have access to? Kresh began, then stopped herself. Put it through. The view screen shifted, and collective gasps filled the room. The being on the screen was unmistakably human. Bipedal, with dark skin, short hair, and eyes that seemed to burn with intensity. It wore a uniform of deep blue with silver insignia that matched no known military force. This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Earth Alliance Fleet. The human spoke, its voice deeper than Thero had imagined from historical records. We request immediate audience with the governing body of the Arcadian Dominion. Chancellor Kresh stepped forward, visibly composing herself. This is High Chancellor Kresh of the Arcadian Council. Your presence in our space is unauthorized, and your identity claim is problematic. Humans are extinct. The human's mouth curved upward slightly. A smile. According to Thero's research, though historical texts suggested it could indicate either friendliness or aggression. Reports of our extinction were greatly exaggerated, Chancellor, the human replied. We've been watching from the shadows for centuries. Now circumstances require us to step back into the light. Kresh's crest flashed warning colors. What circumstances? The human's expression turned grim. The Vesperians have returned. And this time, they're coming for all of us. The room erupted in panic. The Vesperians were ancient enemies of the Arcadian Dominion from before the time of order. Savage, hive-minded conquerors that had supposedly been driven to the furthest reaches of the galaxy millennia ago. Thero pushed closer to the view screen, staring at the living embodiment of his research. Humans weren't just real. They had advanced beyond anything the Arcadian histories had predicted. How do you know of the Vesperians? Kresh demanded. Those records are sealed even from most of our own people. Because we've been fighting them for the past 300 years on the Galactic Rim, Admiral Chen responded. They've been gathering strength, evolving. Now they're pushing toward the core systems. Your defenses won't hold against what's coming. Thero couldn't contain himself. You've been out there all this time. How did humans survive? Our records show your homeworld was destroyed. The human's gaze shifted to Thero, studying him with disconcerting intensity. Earth was attacked, not destroyed. We made the galaxy believe we perished because it was our only chance for survival. Why reveal yourselves now? Kresh asked. Because the Vesperian hive fleets will reach your outer colonies within 30 cycles. Alone, neither of us will survive what's coming. Together, we might have a chance. The Admiral's expression hardened. The Arcadian Dominion once abandoned Earth to its fate. We haven't forgotten that betrayal. But we're offering you a second chance at alliance. Chancellor Kresh's crest flattened against her skull, a sign of extreme stress. These accusations are accurate, the human interrupted. Your ancestors deemed humanity too unpredictable, too dangerous to include in your precious dominion. When the first Vesperian scouts found Earth, your council decided it was an acceptable sacrifice to protect your borders. Thero felt his world tilting. Nothing in the official histories mentioned this, but it would explain why human records were so heavily restricted. We need to verify these claims, Kresh said finally. Our sensors detect your vessels are armed. Of course they are, Admiral Chen replied. We've been at war for centuries, but we're not here to fight you, unless you force our hand. The tension in the command center was thick enough to cut with a blade. Thero watched as Chancellor Kresh visibly weighed her options. A delegation, she finally decided. We will receive a small delegation aboard our diplomatic vessel. You will present your evidence about these supposed Vesperian movements. The human nodded once. Agreed. But our delegation will include our lead tactician, who has spent her life studying Vesperian battle strategies, and we'll need your historian. He pointed directly at Thero. The one who's been tracking our quantum signatures. All eyes turned to Thero again. His tertiary heart nearly stopped beating. How do you know about him? Kresh demanded. Admiral Chen's smile returned, this time with unmistakable satisfaction. We've been watching you for centuries, Chancellor. Did you really think we wouldn't notice someone finally starting to uncover the truth? 6 hours later, Thero found himself aboard the Arcadian diplomatic vessel Concord, waiting in a sterile reception chamber with Chancellor Kresh and a contingent of Arcadian security officers. The air was thick with tension. Remember your place, historian, Kresh warned him quietly. You are here to observe and verify historical claims only. Do not speak unless directed. Thero nodded, though his mind raced with 1,000 questions. After a lifetime studying human artifacts and theories, he was about to meet actual living humans. The significance was overwhelming. The chamber doors slid open. 3 figures entered, 2 humans flanking a third who was clearly their leader. The central figure was shorter than Admiral Chen had appeared on the view screen, with pale skin and striking red hair pulled back severely from a face marked with what appeared to be ritual scarring. Captain Elena Reyes. She introduced herself with a crisp nod. Tactical commander of the Earth Alliance fleet. Her companions were a towering dark-skinned male and a smaller, wiry individual whose gender Thero couldn't immediately determine based on his limited knowledge of human physiognomy. Chancellor Kresh performed the formal Arcadian greeting. The Dominion extends tentative welcome. You make extraordinary claims that require extraordinary evidence. Captain Reyes nodded to her companions. The smaller human activated a device on their wrist, and suddenly the chamber filled with a 3-dimensional holographic display of the galaxy. Certain regions glowed with an ominous red light that spread like a disease across the stars. Vesperian expansion over the past century, Reyes explained. The red zones are areas they've already converted to their high architecture. Yellow marks contested space where we've been engaging them. Thero stared in horror. The red zone encompassed nearly a quarter of the galaxy, regions the Arcadian charts listed as simply unexplored or hazardous. Why would we have no reports of this? Kresh demanded. Because the Vesperians don't leave survivors, the taller human stated flatly. And because your precious dominion has been systematically avoiding these regions, reclassifying them as uninhabitable rather than investigating why contact was lost. And how did humanity survive when supposedly more advanced civilizations fell? Kresh challenged. Captain Rey's eyes hardened. Because we never had the luxury of believing ourselves safe behind borders or treaties. When your dominion left us to die, we adapted. The Vesperian scouts that attacked Earth encountered something they hadn't faced before, a species that refused to surrender. The hologram shifted, showing historical footage that made Theros' hearts skip. Human vessels, primitive by current standards, engaging with organic-looking Vesperian ships. The humans fought with desperate creativity, using their planet's natural satellite as cover, luring enemies into the path of solar flares, sacrificing ships to create debris fields that damaged Vesperian sensor arrays. We lost Earth, Rice continued, her voice tight with controlled emotion. But not before we learned how they fought. Not before we captured one of their ships and reverse-engineered their technology. And not before we evacuated 17 million humans to underground colonies on Mars and Europa. The larger human spoke up. While your dominion was declaring us extinct and erasing us from your histories, we were rebuilding, adapting, evolving specifically to fight an enemy you chose to ignore. Thero couldn't contain himself any longer. The forbidden sectors. They were buffer zones. All eyes turned to him. Captain Rice nodded appreciatively. Smart historian. Yes. Your dominion established quarantine zones not to contain natural hazards as your people were told, but to create distance between your precious core worlds and what you knew was coming. Every few decades, you'd sacrifice another outlying system by reclassifying it as uninhabitable rather than admit what was really happening. Chancellor Kresh's crest flattened completely against her skull. These accusations are documented in your own sealed archives. Rise interrupted. Archives this historian has been trying to access based on our intelligence. Thero felt lightheaded. Everything he'd suspected, the inconsistencies in the historical record, the strange gaps in exploration data, suddenly made horrible sense. If what you say is true, Kresh said carefully, why would humans offer alliance rather than retribution? Captain Ray's expression turned grim. Because the Vesperians have evolved faster than we anticipated. Their new high ships can tear through our best defenses. They've adapted to our tactics. Alone, we'll fall within a decade. And once we're gone, there's nothing standing between them and the Dominion. The holographic display shifted again, showing a massive organic-looking structure, a Vesperian high ship, dwarfing even the largest human vessels. This was recorded 3 weeks ago at the Battle of Proxima Threshold, Rise explained. We lost 47 ships. The high vessel suffered minimal damage. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Thero watched Chancellor Kresh struggling with the implications. What are you proposing? She finally asked. A genuine alliance, Rise replied. Not the false promises your ancestors made to Earth. We share our Vesperian combat experience and adaptive technologies. You provide manufacturing capacity and raw materials that we lack. And if we refuse, Captain Rice didn't blink. Then we'll continue fighting alone until we fall. And you'll have perhaps 5 years before the Vesperians reach your core worlds. Your choice, Chancellor. The challenge hung in the air between them. Two civilizations that had evolved separately for centuries, one believing the other extinct, now forced to consider cooperation against an existential threat. Before Kresh could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. The communications panel on the wall flashed urgent red. Chancellor. The voice of the Concorde's captain filled the room. Multiple unidentified vessels just appeared on long-range sensors. Configurations matched nothing in our database. Captain Rice and her companions exchanged grim looks. They're here already, Rice said quietly. We're out of time. The awakening. The observation deck of the Arcadian diplomatic vessel Concorde erupted into frantic activity. Tactical displays flashed red as officers called out status reports in increasingly strained voices. 7 vessels detected approaching from the Kitharan Nebula, announced the sensor officer. Organic configurations, massive energy signatures. They matched the humans' Vesperian profiles. Chancellor Kresh turned to Captain Rice, her luminescent crest flashing danger patterns. "You led them here." "Impossible," Rise replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Our approach vectors were specifically calculated to avoid detection." "This is something else." She activated her wrist communicator. "Chen, we have company. Vesperian advance scouts, 7 ships, approaching the diplomatic rendezvous." Admiral Chen's voice came through clearly. "Confirmed. We're tracking them." "This isn't coincidence, Elena. They're hunting." Thero watched the tactical display with growing horror. The Vesperian vessels moved with eerie synchronization, their organic-looking hulls pulsing with internal light as they accelerated toward the diplomatic meeting point. "Your ship needs to retreat immediately," Rise ordered Kresh. "The Concorde has no meaningful defenses against Vesperian weapons." "We do not take orders from," Kresh began. "With respect, Chancellor," the Concorde's captain interrupted through the comm system. "Our analysis confirms these vessels match no known configuration. Our standard defenses may be insufficient." Rise gestured to her companions, who immediately moved toward the exit. "We're returning to our shuttle. Admiral Chen will move our fleet to intercept." "Get your people to safety, Chancellor." Thero found himself speaking without permission. "Let me come with you. I've studied everything the archives have on Vesperians. I might be able to help." The human captain assessed him with a penetrating stare, then gave a curt nod. "Keep up." Before Chancellor Kresh could object, Thero was following the humans through the corridors of the Concorde toward the docking bay. Alarms blared as the diplomatic vessel began emergency acceleration away from the approaching threat. "You realize there's no going back from this," the taller human told Thero as they ran. "The Council will consider you a traitor." "If these Vesperians are what you claim," Thero replied, "there may be no Council to return to if we fail." The human shuttle was unlike anything Thero had ever seen. Its interior was a seamless blend of organic curves and metallic surfaces that seemed to pulse with energy. As they strapped in, the shuttle detached from the Concorde and accelerated with gut-wrenching speed. Through the viewports, Thero saw the human fleet moving into formation. 17 vessels arranging themselves in what appeared to be a random pattern, but which he sensed held some deeper tactical logic. "Historian," Captain Rice addressed him as she studied tactical displays, "you said you've studied Vesperians. What exactly do you know?" Thero gathered his thoughts. "Only what exists in the ancient records. The Vesperians were a hive-mind species encountered during the early expansion era. Their biotechnology was unlike anything the early Arcadian explorers had seen. Ships that were grown rather than built, weapons that adapted to enemy defenses. The records say they were driven back to the galactic rim 12,000 years ago." "Driven back, not defeated," the smaller human corrected. "They'd introduced themselves as tactical specialist Zhang, an important distinction." The shuttle docked with the human flagship, a massive vessel that Reyes identified as the Defiance. As they disembarked, Thero found himself in an environment that defied his expectations of human technology. The ship's interior was a perfect integration of biological and mechanical systems, with walls that seemed to breathe and conduits that pulsed with energy like veins. Crew members, all human, all moving with practiced efficiency, barely glanced at the alien in their midst as Reyes led him to the bridge. There, Admiral Chen stood before a three-dimensional tactical display that showed the approaching Vesperian vessels. "They've accelerated," Chen reported grimly. "Intercept in 17 minutes. "Pattern?" Reyes asked. "Hunting Formation Alpha. They know we're here." Chen turned to Thero. "Did your council warn them?" "Impossible," Thero replied, offended at the suggestion. "The council may have omitted truths from our historical records, but they would never ally with Vesperians." "Doesn't need to be an alliance," Rice said, studying the tactical display. "Could be tracking beacons, implanted spies, or quantum entanglement monitors." A human officer approached with a device that looked unsettlingly like a medical scanner. "Captain, we should check our guest for trackers." Thero submitted to the scan, which revealed nothing unusual. The humans exchanged glances. Then how did they find us? Zhang wondered aloud. Admiral Chen's expression darkened. They're evolving faster than we thought. New sensing capabilities. Or they've been watching the Arcadians all along, Rai suggested, waiting for the right moment. Our arrival might have triggered contingency protocols. The tactical officer's voice cut through their speculation. Admiral, Vesperian vessels accelerating. They're launching swarmer units. On the display, thousands of smaller objects detached from the larger ships, moving in perfect coordination. Battle stations, Chen ordered calmly. Execute pattern Prometheus. The human fleet began to move, reshaping its formation into something that reminded Thero of ancient Arcadian hunting formations. The flagship shuddered slightly as its weapon systems came online. Historian, Rise addressed Thero without taking her eyes off the tactical display. You're about to see why humanity survived when the Dominion thought we perished. Watch and learn. What followed was unlike any naval engagement described in Arcadian military texts. The human vessels moved in constantly shifting patterns, never maintaining the same formation for more than a few moments. They seemed to anticipate the Vesperian attack seconds before they came, adjusting position with impossible precision. When the Vesperian swarmers, dart-like organic projectiles controlled by the hive mind, approached, the human vessels released countermeasures that shocked Thero. Not conventional weapon fire, but clouds of engineered microorganisms that attached to the swarmers and began dissolving their biomechanical systems. Phage countermeasures, Zhang explained, noting Thero's fascination. We realized early on that fighting biological weapons requires biological responses. Each batch is engineered for the specific Vesperian biotech we're facing. How can you adapt so quickly? Thero asked, watching as the human fleet reorganized again, 3 vessels moving to protect a 4th that appeared to be implementing some kind of weapons reconfiguration. Necessity, Chen replied simply. When your species faces extinction, you either adapt or die. We chose to adapt. The battle unfolded with horrifying beauty. The Vesperian vessels moved with the coordination of a single organism, which indeed they were, extensions of the hive mind. But the human fleet moved with something Thero hadn't expected, creativity. Where the Vesperians showed perfect unity, the humans displayed perfect improvisation. They're targeting the horizon. A tactical officer called out, switching to absorption protocols. One of the human vessels suddenly altered its hull configuration, panels opening to reveal surfaces that seemed to drink in the sickly green energy beam the Vesperian ship had fired. Energy conversion successful, the officer reported. We're routing to weapon systems. Fire pattern Delta, Chen ordered. Target their sensory clusters. The human vessel that had absorbed the attack now released the energy back at the Vesperian ships, but modulated into a frequency that seemed to cause them distress. The organic ships writhed, their coordinated movements temporarily disrupted. Now, Rise ordered. All vessels, execute sundering protocol. The human fleet moved as one, each vessel targeting a specific point on the largest Vesperian ship. Their weapons, a technology Thero couldn't begin to understand, fired simultaneously. The combined effect tore the Vesperian vessel apart, its organic components shuddering before rupturing in a cascade of destruction. Cheers erupted across the bridge, quickly silenced by Chen's raised hand. One down, he said grimly. But they've already adapted to that tactic. Prepare secondary protocols. Thero watched in amazement as the human vessels reorganized yet again, this time into a formation that seemed to make no tactical sense whatsoever, until he realized they were deliberately creating gaps in their defense. You're baiting them, he said aloud. Rise nodded without looking away from the tactical display. The Vesperian hive mind is incredibly intelligent, but fundamentally predictable in one aspect. It always attacks perceived weakness with overwhelming force. As if on cue, 3 Vesperian vessels accelerated toward a gap in the human formation. The moment they committed to the attack vector, The human ships executed a maneuver that Thero would have deemed impossible, a simultaneous microjump that repositioned them directly behind the attacking Vesperians. Neurological disruptor arrays, full power, Chen ordered. The human vessels released a wave of energy that seemed to pass harmlessly through space until it reached the Vesperian ships. The effect was immediate and devastating. The organic vessels convulsed, their coordinated movements dissolving into chaos. The hive mind can't maintain neural cohesion through the disruption field, Zhang explained to Thero. It's like suddenly severing thousands of connections in a neural network. The disabled Vesperian ships, temporarily cut off from their controlling intelligence, drifted helplessly as the human vessels closed in to deliver precision strikes against what must have been vital systems. 2 more Vesperian ships shuddered and went dark. But the remaining vessels had already adapted. The next wave of Vesperian attacks came with a new twist, emissions that seemed to counter the human disruptor technology. They learned fast, Thero observed. Always have, Rais replied grimly. It's why we never use the same tactic twice in the same engagement. Admiral, shall we proceed to Chimera Protocol? Chen nodded, his expression grave. All hands, prepare for Chimera. This will get rough. The human flagship suddenly accelerated directly toward the largest remaining Vesperian vessel, a move so seemingly suicidal that Thero couldn't contain his alarm. What are you doing? He demanded. Watch, Zhang said quietly. As the Defiance approached the Vesperian vessel, it began to change. Its hull reconfigured, panels shifting to reveal what appeared to be organic components, not unlike those of the Vesperian ships themselves. Energy signatures from the human vessel shifted, becoming eerily similar to Vesperian patterns. Mimicry technology, Rais explained. We've incorporated elements of Vesperian biology into our ships, allowing us to temporarily mask ourselves as part of their hive network. The Vesperian vessel hesitated, its weapon systems powering down as it attempted to reconcile the contradictory signals. Now, Chen ordered. The Defiance released a payload directly into the heart of the confused Vesperian ship, not an explosive, but what appeared to be a swarm of microscopic robots that burrowed into the organic hull. Nanite disassemblers, Zhang said. They'll convert the Vesperian ship's biological components into inert matter from the inside out. The effect was horrifyingly efficient. The Vesperian vessel began to calcify, its organic systems turning gray and brittle as the nanite spread throughout its structure. Within minutes, what had been a living ship became a drifting husk. The remaining Vesperian vessels immediately retreated, jumping to faster-than-light speeds with a flash of distorted space. They'll warn the main hive fleet, Chen said, his voice tight. We've bought some time, but not much. Thero stood in stunned silence, trying to process what he had witnessed. The humans hadn't just survived. They had evolved into something perfectly adapted to fight an enemy that had terrified the Arcadian Dominion into denial and retreat for millennia. Now do you understand? Rais asked him. This is what we've been doing for centuries while your council pretended we were extinct. Every battle, every engagement taught us something new. We've rebuilt our entire civilization around one purpose, stopping the Vesperians before they consumed the galaxy. The council needs to see this, Thero said, his voice barely above a whisper. They need to understand what's coming. Admiral Chen turned from the tactical display. That's why you're here, historian. You're returning to the Arcadian Council with the evidence they can no longer deny. And a message. 2 days later, Thero stood once again before the 7 High Chancellors. But everything had changed. The chamber that had once impressed him with its grandeur now seemed like a relic of complacent times, a monument to a civilization that had hidden from hard truths for too long. Behind him stood Captain Rice and Admiral Chen, their presence causing ripples of unease among the council representatives. On the massive display screens around the chamber played recordings of the battle against the Vesperian scouts, along with historical data showing the true extent of Vesperian expansion across the galaxy. The evidence is irrefutable, Thero concluded his presentation. Humanity didn't perish. They evolved specifically to fight an enemy that we chose to ignore. And now that enemy is at our doorstep. Chancellor Kresch's normally commanding presence seemed diminished. These records, if accurate, suggest a failure of historical proportions by previous councils. Call it what it is, Rise said bluntly. Cowardice. Your ancestors sacrificed Earth rather than face the truth about the Vesperians. They rewrote history rather than prepare for war. Murmurs of outrage rippled through the chamber, but Kresch silenced them with a gesture. What would you have us do now? She asked. Our fleet is designed for peacekeeping, not war against. This. She gestured to the horrifying images of Vesperian high ships on the displays. Admiral Chen stepped forward. We propose a genuine alliance, not the false promises your ancestors made to Earth. We share our Vesperian combat experience and adaptive technologies. You provide manufacturing capacity and raw materials that we lack. You're asking us to restructure our entire civilization, one of the other chancellors objected. To turn the Dominion into a war machine. I'm asking you to survive, Chen corrected. The Vesperians don't negotiate. They don't show mercy. They consume and convert. Every world they take becomes part of their hive network. Every species they encounter either joins the collective or is processed for biological resources. Thero watched the chancellors exchange glances, seeing the weight of the decision before them. Centuries of peace and prosperity had left the Dominion unprepared for existential threats. What guarantee do we have that humanity won't turn against us once the Vesperian threat is addressed? Chancellor Morda asked. Your people have reason to resent the Dominion. Rais smiled thinly. No guarantees, just the reality that we need each other to survive. Humanity has spent centuries adapting to fight Vesperians, but we lack the industrial capacity to build enough ships. You have the factories and resources, but your defensive technologies are centuries behind what's needed. And there's something else, Thero added, drawing surprised looks from the humans. Something I believe may be crucial to understanding why the humans have been so effective against the Vesperians. He activated his data terminal, displaying comparative neural mapping between various species. The Vesperian hive mind operates on principles of perfect unity, every unit functioning as part of